Another day, another rainstorm. I'm glad you've come to spend it with me, though, and sit around as we hear many great tales of many spooky occurrences. Welcome to Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get started with more great stories. We've all had a strange dream or two. Maybe a dream that we have to wonder whether it was a dream or not. Well, the subject of today's story is no different. So let's hope when you settle in for bed later, you don't find yourself the subject of a strange vision.
It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life, and I honestly have no explanation for it. My boyfriend and I were on a bit of a road trip, traveling to see my parents the next state over. They had never met him, despite the two of us having dated for almost 2 years. He had proposed to me the week before, my mother seeing the pictures on Instagram, and she had asked when they were finally going to get to meet this mystery boy I intended to marry. I hated that I didn't get to see my mom as much these days. My dad and I had a bit of a falling out before I moved, but he was looking to reconcile, and I was looking for some closure before my marriage to the sweetest man I'd ever met. We were driving, the countryside sliding past, and I felt myself drifting off as I just sat there and took it in. "Feeling like a little nap, babe?" he asked, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I think I might close my eyes for a second or two." "Well, okay. I'm gonna stop for some food soon. 20 winks at the most," he joked. I stuck my tongue out at him and let my eyes slip shut as I blocked out the cows and the green fields that went sliding past the window. When I opened my eyes, the landscape was very different. The sky was red, like burnt red, the color of a jack-o'-lantern, and it seemed to be crackling with heat lightning as I watched. Something was falling from it, something bright that trailed a long tail. They almost looked like comets, but they were too close. We were on the road, but it was pitted and old. The concrete was flaked and peeling, and the landscape was eroded and rocky. Despite this, yellow crops grew from the arid soil, and I could see strange brown creatures with bloated bodies moving along on scaly legs. None of it was right. We should be traveling through Midwestern farmland, and the lightning was rumbling again. I saw it hit the ground and leave a crater amidst the too dry vegetation. I looked to Brad for some kind of answers, but as upsetting as the landscape was, Brad was the most upsetting thing about this, whatever it was. He stared ahead, eyes on the road, as he sat stock still and stared through the window as if it were completely normal. "Brad? What the hell, where the hell are we?" He stared ahead and said nothing. "Brad, what's going on?" He stared ahead, and as I watched, something seemed to move beneath his cheek. I was scared. He was so still, but I found myself unable to look away. Brad was a joker, but he didn't usually joke like this. This was different. This was making me very afraid, and I started to worry about something being wrong with him. Then, ever so slightly, he turned his head, and I found myself wishing he had just stayed facing forward. His eyes were jet black, too big and starey. His face was locked in the rictus of a smile, and it seemed he was having some sort of fit. His skin was moving, writhing, and as I watched, a large black beetle slid from his mouth and scuttled into his ear. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me. I became aware of how quiet it was, only the thunder making any noise as it struck outside the window, and the silence was a whole other monster that lurked. It became claustrophobic, like those parts in a horror movie where you're waiting for the monster to scream and scare you so you can just get on with the story. The scream never came. The scare never happened, and I just sat and looked at this thing as it drove us towards wherever we were going. As we sat staring at each other, however, the car was invaded by the sound of a loud, cavernous scream. I turned in time to see our vehicle barreling towards something large and gray that was walking laboriously across the road. I only saw it for a split second, but it was huge, and the thing we were careening towards was a leg that seemed to take up the whole road. Its skin was craggy, like a living mountain, and as it tried to ponderously get its bulk out of the road, we hit it squarely, and the car made a sound like an angry animal. The crash happened in slow motion. The vehicle's front crunched in, lifting us off the ground. As the windshield bulged in, the bubble slowly grew before bursting, pushing inward like a rising wave. The glass shattered out like a cascade of beautiful diamonds as it pelted toward my face. Through it all, those dark eyes glared into my soul. He maintained eye contact until I woke up, screaming as the pain radiated up my face. I heard a screech of tires and an angry exclamation from my boyfriend as I came to. The car swerved back onto the road, and I clutched my nose and screamed. The pain was instant and mind-numbing, shooting agony that radiated through my nose and spread through my face. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. Through my tear-streaked eyes, I could see that everything was back to the way it was before I dozed off. Had it all been a dream? My throbbing nose kind of made me think that it had been real. The pain was becoming too much, and I begged him to take me to a hospital. He obliged as best he could, and 20 minutes later, we walked into the ER lobby in the nearest town. It was a slow day, I suppose, because they let us back and asked me questions as I helped them fill out paperwork. They didn't leave us sitting in the room for long either. In no time at all, someone was taking my hand off my face, and my boyfriend was holding my arms to keep me from trying to cover it again. I wanted to cover my face again badly, my nose a white-hot ball of agony, and the touch of Brad's hand was making me shudder. I couldn't look at him, because despite knowing that it was a dream, all I could see was that bug-filled creature with dead eyes looking back at me. The doctor looked into my left nostril with a light and furrowed his brow. That's weird. Hold very still for a second. Brad held me, wrapping his body around me, which only made me shudder worse, as the doctor reached into my nose and pulled something out that seemed to cut me as it came free. My nose hurt all the worse, like it was being sliced with a razor blade, and as it came free of my nose, I could see that it had been what was causing me the pain. It glittered wetly, red drops dappling the edges of the object as it slid out into the light of day. It was a shard of glass, about as long as my pinky tip, and nearly as wide. They had a lot of questions I couldn't answer, and Brad was utterly bewildered as to how it had gotten in my nose in the first place. I can't explain it myself. It was as if I had dozed off perfectly fine and woke up with a huge piece of glass in my face. I told them about the dream, but that didn't seem to convince them in the least bit. I simply gained a giant piece of glass somehow. No one seems to be able to tell me why. That's why I'm writing this, honestly. I sent Brad out to get me some clothes from the car, but I don't know if I can even get back in the car with him. Sometimes he looks normal, but sometimes, just for a second, I can see that weird thing staring out of his face. The other subs I put this in seem to think it was a joke, but you guys seem to appreciate weird stuff, so any advice would be greatly appreciated. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to be able to drive for another 2 hours with him. I don't know what's going on or if I'll ever get over this.
The rain on the tin roof always puts me at ease. Lets me know I'm home, safe and sound, amongst all the horror that I create on a daily basis, I suppose. It's never easy to lose a loved one, especially when that loved one is your spouse. Fortunately, I don't have any experience with that, and hope not to for quite some time. But the mourning period is different for everyone. especially when there seem to be little reminders everywhere of the person you lost. So, if you're going through a period of mourning, let's hope you don't have constant reminders tailing you, especially if it's a shadow of their former self.
It all started when my wife died 8 months ago. Susan was everything to me. We'd been together since high school, and it had been love at first sight. We married after graduation, and we spent 18 years together in wedded bliss. I worked as a writer, finding jobs in editing or column writing. Susan working as a receptionist for a friend of my mother's. We spent a lot of time together. My days spent mostly waiting for her to come home. I lived for the moments when we were sitting in front of the TV together or curled up in bed as we talked about our day. We never had children, though it wasn't for a lack of trying. I was afraid she would leave me when she discovered I was infertile. I'd been injured when I was small, but she just smiled and said we'd just have to be satisfied with each other. It was never something we struggled with. Instead of kids, we gave each other our full attention. We traveled as often as we could, ate out often, had date nights at least once a week, and loved each other more than anyone else we knew. Susan was my everything, and I hoped I was hers. She never gave me any doubt that it was so, and those 18 years were the happiest time of my life. They weren't enough, though. 1,000,000 years wouldn't have been enough. I was writing something for some rag that Susan liked to read when I got the call. She had looked over my shoulder that morning before she left, cooing appreciatively as I edited a piece from one of her favorite writers, other than me, of course. She wanted to read it when I was done, and I promised I'd let her see it when she got home. I'd been invited to write a column, too, something they might let me do more often if it did well, and I'd just started fleshing it out when I decided it was time for a second cup of coffee. The coffee maker was burbling happily, filling my mug with liquid happiness, when my phone rang. Thought it might be Susan, letting me know she had made it to work, and I almost didn't answer when I saw it was an unknown number. The telemarketers had been particularly bad lately, and the last thing I wanted was another conversation with someone who wanted to sell me solar panels or extend the warranty on my car. Turned out it was the police. There'd been an accident. They were sorry, but she had passed very quickly, likely instantly, and hadn't felt any pain. My cup smashed as it hit the floor, soaking my feet in hot coffee as I gripped the counter for support. I would need support for the next few months. I was a wreck. My wife had been my whole world, and suddenly I was alone. I couldn't even go into the bedroom for the first 2 weeks. It smelled like her. Her pictures were everywhere. I slept on the couch a lot those days. I didn't even go in there to get my suit. I just bought a new one off the rack for the funeral. It was small. Neither of us had a lot of friends or family, but the girls from the doctor's office were very supportive, very sorry to lose such a dear friend. We buried her in Mountain Hills, a cemetery not far from the house. After they lowered her into the ground, I just sat there, trying to figure out what to do. I was still sitting there when the guys from the funeral home came to pick up the chairs, the sun setting behind me as I watched the hole in the ground where my wife now lay. "Sorry for your loss, mister, but we got to pack these up now." I just got up and drove home, finding myself sitting on the couch. When the sun came up, I was still sitting there. This
became a pattern. The next 2 months are kind of a blur, honestly. I lived my life like that quote from Forrest Gump. When I was tired, I slept. When I was hungry, I ate. And when I had to go, I went. I really didn't leave the house unless I had to, and when I did, I walked. I didn't trust cars after that, and I'm still not comfortable riding in anything with wheels. The walks probably did me good, but I was so lost at that point in my life. She'd been my everything, my whole world, and I just didn't know how to get by without her. I didn't work. My contracts quickly dried up. I wasn't working on my book either, and I'd fallen into a deep funk. If something hadn't pulled me out, I would have probably wasted away right there. Luckily, I suppose, something did. That was when the gifts started showing up. The first one came on Valentine's Day, though I now know that was no accident. I had stepped out in the evening to check the mail, and there it was on the stoop. I almost stepped on it, and that would have been a shame because someone had left my favorites. Sitting there was a bouquet of wildflowers, a box of those dark chocolate truffles Susan had always bought me, and a card. I was stunned for a moment, not quite believing what I was seeing. This was just the sort of thing she would do, too, and I expected her to jump around the corner and surprise me. She hadn't been very large, a wisp of a thing, but she liked to scare people and found it hilarious when she managed to. As the minutes stretched by and no scare seemed incoming, I picked up the stuff and brought it inside. I put the flowers in some water. I had never gotten flowers before, but I remembered that much, and set the chocolates on the table. I opened the card and found a pretty generic card inside, flipping it open to see who had sent it. I snorted as I read it, wondering whose bright idea that had been, but feeling a little better, nonetheless. From your secret admirer was written inside, the handwriting fine and spidery, just like hers had always been. As I ate the chocolates, I felt the tears come on unbidden. The taste, the smell, it all reminded me of Valentine's days past. We would sit and watch a movie, curled up on the couch together, while she munched at her Ferrero Rochers and I ate my chocolate truffles. We'd trade sometimes, and I wish now that I could see her eyes light up as I handed her one of my chocolates again. I passed out on the couch a little later, but my dreams were a little brighter that night. After that, I started finding other gifts. Food from my favorite Chinese place, candy, books by writers that I liked. One time, someone even delivered a seafood feast from Sir Crabbington's, and I was halfway through it before I realized it was mine and Susan's wedding anniversary. I waited till after I'd finished before crying this time, but the tears were still there. I never questioned these gifts, but I never looked for them either. I assumed they were from friends or from the girls at the office she had worked at, but their dedication was heartwarming if it was. My wife must have talked about me a lot for them to know my favorite foods and snacks, and I was honestly just happy for a break in the sadness. Each of these gifts made my day a little better, and the pain ebbed away a little more with each new package. Suddenly I was feeling inspired to write again. I had the energy to reach out to my old contacts and try to work. I was running in the evenings. I was doing laundry and dishes, and felt like I might be getting a little better. The gifts were nice, but it was the other things that started to make me wonder if the gifts were all that was being given. Sometimes I would wake up to find that the clothes were folded or the dishes were already done, and I couldn't remember having done them. Other times it would be simpler things easily explained but no less odd, a blanket thrown across me where there hadn't been one before, a pillow under my head when I had slept on the couch and left it in the bed. Sometimes as I came awake a little in the night, it seemed like I could see shadows moving in my house. I would sit up, the living room bathed in the light of whatever TV show I had fallen asleep watching, and look around for the source of the movement, finding nothing. It was weird, but I figured it was probably just my imagination. I'd been through a lot lately. Some mild hallucinations might be expected. It was on one of my jogs when I finally discovered the identity of my secret admirer. I was coming up the hallway, huffing a little from a longer jog than usual tonight, when I saw someone leaving something outside my door. I had to grab the wall for a minute when I first saw her because I thought it might be my wife. She was short, with brown hair that had been cut into a pixie cut. She was dressed normally enough in jeans and a t-shirt, but the high tops were also something that my wife favored. From the back, she looked exactly like my dead wife, except for the hair. My wife had always talked about getting it cut short, but she favored ponytails and braids too much to ever cut it too short. She was bent at the waist, leaving food or something for me, and when I called her name, she jumped. When she turned around, though, I could see that I'd been mistaken. The woman was similar, but her face was different. They could have been sisters, but there were definitely subtle differences. Her nose was rounder, her face less angular, and she just seemed less substantial. I began to wonder if she might be a cousin or something, but I couldn't think of anyone in Susan's family who looked much like her. "Oh my gosh," she said, looking embarrassed. "I guess you caught me. Sorry for being so mysterious. I just didn't want to mess up your morning. I was a friend of your wife's. My name's Anne." She offered me a hand to shake, and I likely looked just as unsure of myself as I took it. I told her to knock next time and come and share a meal with me. She agreed. That began our strange friendship. Anne was just the companion I needed, and we spent 2 or 3 nights a week in my living room. Some of you will lift an eyebrow at that, but it was never anything more than talk. Anne cried as often as I did, and the two of us reminisced over Susan and what she had meant to us. Anne, as it turned out, had known her far longer than I had. The two had been friends since they were children, and Anne told me about Susan's early life in a way that made them almost sound like sisters. The more she told me, the more I wondered why I'd never heard of her before. If Susan had known Anne since they were children, why was this the first time I was meeting her? Many of her stories were things that I had heard before, so they tracked, but any misgivings soon melted away as we spent our evenings remembering. Sometimes she held me while I cried. Sometimes I held her, but it was nice to have someone there in my grief. She had just gotten done with a particularly funny story about how Susan had cut her hair too short and given herself something like a mullet before shaving it down into a sloppy pixie cut when she suddenly began to cry. Her despair was deep, the sobs racking her, and when I went to hold her, she pressed her face against my chest. "I'm sorry, I miss her so much." I held her that night as she wept, and I think that was when I started to fall in love with her. It made me feel terrible, but I couldn't help it. She was so much like Susan. Even her voice reminded me a little of my dead wife. I didn't want to move on. I was still trying to process what to do next, but Anne helped a lot, and I got the feeling that she didn't mind being that person for me. Suddenly, she was coming over every night, bringing food or wine, and we spent our evenings together. It didn't seem to bother her that I never wanted to leave the house. Didn't make any difference to her that I didn't cook, but the longer she was in my life, the more that changed. Suddenly I was paying more attention to my clothes. I was taking on columns for online magazines and selling my short stories again. I was cooking dinners instead of eating takeout, and I felt as if I were getting better. Anne was a big supporter of this, pushing me to get better, and that was when I started to notice that something was a little off about her, something I should have noticed before then. Anne only came by after dark and was unavailable during the day. Anne had a very demanding job, but would change the subject any time I brought it up. Anne would always leave before dawn, if not well before. Anne wouldn't stay at the house, wanting her own space, which I could respect. These things on their own didn't seem so strange, but altogether they made me curious. I'd also wondered why Susan had never talked about Anne before. It was something that had always been at the back of my mind, but now it began to linger like a fishbone in my throat. If they were so close, why had I never met her? If they'd been friends since childhood, why hadn't she been at our wedding, at our parties, our trips, our gatherings of people that had been drawn around us? And Anne had never been seen at any of those. I asked Anne about that one night, and she waved it off, telling me I must have seen her at one of those things. I've been to every gathering you guys have thrown. I was at your wedding. I was at the funeral. I've been with you guys all the way. It made me think I was going crazy, but I couldn't remember seeing her before that night 2 months ago. I thought about going through old pictures, but neither of us had been picture-taking people. We kept our memories inside, not on our phones, though it made it a little difficult to check now. I was hesitant to bring any of this up in front of her as, well, I didn't want her to feel like I was accusing her of anything. Anne had become very important to me, and I didn't want to go back to sitting in my depression on the couch every night. That was until I saw something that I shouldn't have. We'd been watching a movie on the couch, something Susan and I had seen 1,000 times, and I dozed off towards the end. I had laid my head over on Anne, and if it bothered her, she gave no indication. I don't know how long we sat like that, the two of us together on the couch, but when she got up to leave, I came half awake as I mumbled something about seeing her later. She didn't respond, which I thought meant she hadn't heard me. But as I opened my eye a little, I saw something that froze me in my couch divot. The black shadow was standing in the doorway, its back to me as it prepared to step out into the dim hallway. The creature looked like tar, its form more of a feminine insinuation than a fact. It must have had its back to me, but when I inhaled sharply and fell off the couch, it turned back to see what had happened. I was on the floor, breathing harshly and trying to find enough breath to scream when the shadow creature bent down in front of me and spoke in Anne's voice. It's okay. This wasn't how I wanted you to find out, but I suppose it was inevitable. I couldn't find my breath. I looked at the thing that was speaking with Anne's voice, trying to make sense of all of this. What the hell was going on? In my head, I had wondered if Anne was some kind of stalker or a weirdo who was only pretending to know my wife, but this was a little bit beyond anything I had thought about. What? She glanced at the sliding door to our apartment, noticing the sun beginning to peek up and sucking in air. I don't have time now, but please listen. You have to trust me. I would never hurt you, and I'll explain what's going on. Some of the answers might not make a lot of sense, but I promise I'll tell you what's going on. Just wait till tonight, till I get off, and I'll tell you everything I can. Can you do that? I nodded, and she returned it slowly. She got up and walked towards the door, but turned back just before passing through it. I'm still Anne. I'm still the person you've known for the past few months. Just keep that in mind. She walked through the door and left me sitting on the floor of my living room. I was a mess all that day. I didn't understand anything. All I knew was that someone I'd grown pretty close to had turned into featureless monster right before my eyes. I kept trying to convince myself throughout the day that it had all been a dream, that I was still dreaming, but the longer the day went on, the more I had to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't. That meant that whatever that thing had been, it was coming back here tonight. I'd have to make a choice when it got here. Did I let it in, or did I tell it to go away and lose Anne forever? When the knock finally came, night having crept up on me as I worried the day away, I looked out the peephole to see the same old Anne standing on my doorstep. As I opened the door, she breathed a sigh of relief and asked if she could come in. I let her in, figuring that if the creature had wanted to hurt me, it would have done it before now. "Okay," she said, not sitting as she paced the living room. "I know you've probably got a ton of questions, but just let me tell you my side before you jump to conclusions." She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she tried to find a place to begin. "I didn't lie. I have been with your wife for a very long time. In fact, I've been with her since she was born. Susan and I have gone everywhere together, right up until the day they buried her. I'm Susan's shadow." I squinted at her, not really sure what to make of that. "When your wife died, I was reassigned to someone else. Someone new. Someone very new, but I still remembered you. I wondered how you were and what you were doing. I hoped you were doing okay, and as this little person napped and ate and sat, I knew I had to go make sure you were all right. I had to stay with my new person during the day when the shadows are most noticeable, but at night I was free to roam a bit more. Babies don't move as much as you might think, and with a 7 o'clock bedtime, I was left with a lot of time to kill. I leave at 5 when the sun is coming up, and come back at night so I can see you." She stopped and looked at me in an expectant way, but my mind was altogether unprepared. "So you're Susan's shadow? How?" "Shadows are part of people, but once they're dead, we aren't really needed. I've been with Susan since the start, since the first time she met you, and I fell in love with you right alongside her. I had to know you were safe, to know that you hadn't given up, so I started coming back to our old house. I found you suffering. So I left you gifts to keep your spirits up, little things to make you realize you were still loved. But I got careless. I let myself get seen, but I guess that worked out in the end. Turned out I was hurting too. I missed Susan. I missed her more than I had any of the other people I'd been attached to before. And talking with you helped me get over her, just as it helped you. We helped each other in the end, and that was what we both needed. We became what the other needed, and I'm thankful that you happened along and found me that day. I had questions, all kinds of questions, but the one that stuck seemed the most obvious. If you have someone new that you've attached to, does that mean that eventually you'll have to go?" She nodded slowly, like she hoped I wouldn't think of that right away. "Eventually, as the person I've been assigned to grows, she'll need me more than just during the day. I may have to stay with her more and more often at night, and that will ultimately mean less time with you. I want to be here for you, but I don't want to stop you from moving on either. You need to get past her, get past me, and eventually return to life as you knew it. You deserve that. You deserve to be happy." I felt the tears leaking down my face, smearing her and turning her into a wavy half-person. Will you stay with me as long as you can?" I asked. She nodded. "I will. I'd really like that." That was 6 months ago.
The little girl that she's become the shadow of, Anne, is starting to move around more, and Anne is happy with her progress. She doesn't think it'll be much longer before she's walking, but she promised that she'll come and see me for a while to come. One day she may decide that the nights are for going out and working, but for now, she's still tossing in her crib before the sun goes down, and that's just fine with me. I don't know how long I'll have Anne for, but I know it would never be long enough. Even as I write this, I know there will come a time when her visits become less and less, and I know that'll be fine too. I had Susan for 18 years, and I'll take whatever time I have with her shadow as a gift. Oh, looks like I've got a little guest. They do so like to come in when I'm recording, just hanging out and soaking in the ambience. I can't say as I blame them, I suppose. There are a few things in childhood that are better than a pile of dirt. Something about climbing on the dirt and rolling around and just having fun with a bit of an oddity that just sort of appeared in your yard. Let's hope when you get your own pile of dirt, though, for whatever purpose you might need it, it doesn't come with any of the surprises we find in today's story. I pushed the sign into the ground and looked at the kids gathering up the street with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Keep off the dirt," it read. I'd seen the way their eyes gleam when the truck came to deliver it, deciding on a preemptive strike. A tall pile of fill dirt was irresistible for small children, and I needed as much of the dirt for my project as possible. Having it scattered all over the yard would make that very difficult, and I needed to post signs before the neighborhood rowdies got any ideas. I went back inside then, not wanting to field questions about my dirt. Sitting in my easy chair, pretending to watch TV, I could see them gathering around to look at the sign. They hunkered over their handlebars and looked dubiously at the sign I had stuck in the mountain of dirt in the front yard. The sign was pretty straightforward, but I wouldn't put it past these kids to find a loophole. They knew me as the cool neighbor, the single guy who gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween and sometimes played baseball in the street with them. The guy who drank on his front porch and sometimes let them fish in his canal, if it was okay with their parents, that was. On some things, however, they knew that I was unbending, and it wouldn't do to argue with me. They all looked up when I came out on the front porch and leaned against the rail to look at them. If you're hoping to find a play-in-the-dirt free card somewhere on top of that pile, it ain't happening. Reggie looked up, and his face was still hopeful. "Gee, Mr. McQuinty, that sure is a great-looking pile of dirt you have there." I nodded, keeping my face neutral as I tried not to smile. "Sure is, and it's for filling in gopher holes, so I'll likely need all of it. If there's any left, though, I'll be sure to let you kids know so you can trample it flat for me." They rode off down the road, sitting a little higher on their bikes as they realized they might still get to play in it. I shook my head as I watched them leave. I'd never known anyone to get so excited about a pile of dirt, except maybe for a bunch of kids. Something about all that fresh, powdery dirt just made them go a little bit crazy. As I looked at the 6-foot mound of fine white dirt, I almost felt like jumping on it myself. I went inside to finish my preparations, getting my work clothes on and finding my gloves. I sat in the living room pulling my boots on when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I glanced up, the afternoon shadows just starting to lengthen, and saw a pair of small figures standing beside the road. I paused in mid-tie, looking up to see two small forms looking at the pile of dirt. It looked to be a couple of neighborhood kids, maybe having one last look before getting back to their game. I shook my head. Kids were so predictable. I finished tying my boots and stepped out onto the front porch. "Hey, looking's fine, but I don't want to see anyone in my..." The road was empty. I looked up and down the road. The kids were already playing a game of touch football further down the cul-de-sac. And I picked up my shovel as I thought about how strange that had been. Those two must have really been booking it to make it back to their playmates so quickly. As I started scooping dirt, I thought longingly about having that kind of energy. It would certainly make this job a lot easier. I spent the rest of the afternoon filling in gopher holes. It had been a particularly bad season for them, and the dirt was a Band-Aid solution at best. The gophers would continue to dig up my yard until I invested in a dog or something. I kept slinging dirt until the sun grew low in the sky,
one angry Chuck actually coming up to growl at me before I threw a shovelful of dirt in his face. When it became too dark to see, I thrust my shovel into the pile of dirt and shook the remaining dirt off myself. The kids were finishing up their football game, heading home as the streetlights came on. They all looked longingly at the pile of dirt, but they knew better than to make a play for it while I was standing on the front porch. My cigarette winked on and off as I stood watching the sun go down, and I pitched the end into the dirt as I went inside. I was frying up some hamburgers when I heard the first tremors of laughter from my front yard. Over the sound of popping grease, I could hear the scuttling laughter of children as they played out front. I walked over to the living room window and looked out into the front yard. By the streetlight's ghostly light, I could see them playing on the mound of dirt I had out front. There were two of them, both dressed in dirty jeans and colorful shirts, both having a ball as they capered on my pile of dirt. I was out the door in a matter of seconds, yelling before the door had fully opened. "Hey, just what the hell do you think you're doing? Can't you read? Stay off the..." The streetlights were dim, but even I could see the absence of anybody in my yard. I walked over to the pile, looking around to see if someone was hiding behind it. I saw pretty quickly that wasn't going to be the case. The pile of dirt was hardly 3 feet tall, and a kid would have to get pretty low to hide behind it. I glanced up and down the street, but the only thing moving on the road was an old chip bag pushed by the wind. I looked back at the pile and was shocked to find that I didn't even see any footprints. The wide, low dirt pile still looked fairly pristine, other than my shovel marks, of course. I scratched my head and went back inside. Maybe I'd just been working too hard today. I pulled my fries out of the oven just as they started to burn. I made 2 hamburgers and added them to the pile of french fries. I tipped a beer into a chilled glass and brought both to the table. After shoveling dirt all afternoon, I was tired and ready for a bite. As I lifted the first one from the plate, I heard my stomach grumble as the grease oozed off the meat. I had just taken the first bite when I heard the metal clang of my shovel falling over. I looked up to find those kids playing on my dirt again. I came barreling out the door, my dinner cooling on my plate, as I stormed out to send these kids off. I was becoming frustrated. I'd made it pretty clear that I didn't want people on my pile of dirt. I had been pretty nice about it, posting signs and asking the kids not to mess with it, but it appeared that some of these kids weren't getting it. If I needed to be a bastard to keep these kids off my dirt, I suppose I'd have to be a bastard. I'd barely gotten 2 words out of my mouth, though, before I once again noticed the yard was empty. I was really getting tired of this. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a pair of filthy kids on my pile of dirt. No matter how many times I checked the yard, though, there was never any sign of a trespasser. The strangest part was a distinct lack of footprints, though. The sand was fresh, maybe even a little damp when you got past the top layer. The kids had been jumping on the sand like a trampoline. There should have been footprints, handprints, something. They came back 3 more times that night, but the last is the only one that really stands out. That was the worst of their appearances. They appeared again as I was finishing my dishes, and again as I sat watching TV. I came striding out to holler at them both times, but all I found was an empty yard. This was ridiculous. What the hell was going on here? I know what I saw, but they were always gone the instant I came outside. Nobody could move that fast, especially not a couple of dirty little kids. And what the hell were they doing out after dark? Most of the parents on this block didn't let their kids out after the streetlights came on. Something funny was going on here. The last time I saw them, that night at least, was just before bedtime. I'd thought the pranks were over as time slipped on. It was 11 o'clock, and I was walking through the living room to get something to help me sleep. I was still a little on edge, and I thought that a nightcap might help me calm down a bit. I was coming out of the kitchen with a tumbler of whiskey, the curtains still open on the front yard, when I saw them there. My glass slipped out of my hand as the 2 kids stood crouching on top of my dirt pile. I was speechless for a moment as the angry fire built inside me. I was furious. Who the hell did these kids think they were? They were coming up in the middle of the night, trying to mess with me. But why? I'd made a very simple request. Why were these kids tormenting me? Because I wouldn't let them play on my damn dirt pile? If I had stopped to quell my anger, I might have noticed that something wasn't right with these 2. The night air was cool on my bare chest as I came shambling out of my house like an angry bull.
Who the hell do you think you are? It's almost midnight. Get your asses over here right now. I'm going to call your parents and let them know what you've been up to. I got a good mind to... They hadn't moved this time, though. They just stood on that mound of dirt like two scrawny scarecrows, glowering at me through the dirt caked over their face. My God, had they been eating the dirt or something? I had thought them filthy, but these kids were downright grimy. They didn't seem at all concerned with me, but I definitely had their full attention. I'd come half into the yard when I saw their eyes. They both seemed to have a nasty case of red-eye. They stared at me, their eyes seeming to glow somehow, and I suddenly noticed that they cast no shadow in the dim streetlight. They should have. The dirt pile and my shovel cast a long gantry into the falling streetlight, but these two had nothing. I had stopped barely 20 feet from the pair when the larger of the two took a step towards me. When his dirty sneakers gritted against the loose earth, the red piping looked faded beneath all that mud, and I saw the earth drop over it like a hand. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but all that came out was wet soil. Sand and mud bubbled out from over his lips, and the dirt that had covered his foot had begun to slide up his leg as well. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat as he coughed up leaves and mud as well. The sand slid over his hands and up his arms, even as the dirt bound the first boy to the pile by his knees. They both struggled, trying to free themselves from the prison of sand, but their efforts were ultimately in vain. The sand reclaimed them both in a sudden whoosh. In a blink, they were both gone again. I walked backwards, never taking my eyes off that pile, until the door was closed between us. The next day, I set to work early. I wanted that pile of dirt out of my yard before nightfall. I worked diligently, filling in holes and putting dirt to good use. I used it to fill in a few of the potholes in front of my house even. I just wanted as much of it gone as I could manage. I no longer cared how it happened. When the kids came by on their bikes, I told them to leave. They seemed disappointed, but I didn't want them anywhere near that dirt pile. I was filling in an exceptionally large gopher hole when something caught my eye. I had nearly turned back to the pile when something pale and long made me take a second look. At first I thought it was a worm, but the more I looked, the more I thought I knew what it was. I bent down, the shovel hitting the ground woodenly, as I reached down to pick up what I hoped was a bleached piece of wood. It wasn't, though. It was cold, malleable if not unmovable, and crooked like a sea of pale, purpling flesh. The perfectly filthy nail was hardly visible at the tip of the small finger. I went back to the pile and saw the rest of the hand poking out from the bottom, minus the finger I had accidentally amputated. The cops came when I called, and they brought dogs with them as well as the big white forensics van. They excavated the bodies of a 10-year-old boy from the bottom of the dirt pile, his face frozen in a look of terrified disbelief. He was dressed in very dirty, if not very familiar clothes, and his sneakers had that same filthy red piping that I'd seen the night before. When they lifted him free, they found that his hand was intertwined with something else that also came loose. The other boy had been about 8, and the two had died hand in hand, it seemed. The police had wanted to arrest me, or at least bring me in for questioning, but the forensics guys had figured out pretty quick that these kids had been dead for the last month. A quick search determined that they had been on the missing persons roster for about 3 weeks, and their parents had feared they'd been abducted by some pervert. They'd been playing near the sand pits before they'd gone missing, and the coroner would later find dirt and mud in their lungs and mouth. He figured they had been climbing the big sand piles out there, piles just waiting to be scooped into a truck and sold as fill dirt, when one of them had been sucked down by a pocket of air or an empty spot in the pile. His brother had tried to help him and ended up getting pulled down as well. The two had suffocated as they tried to get out and been picked up by the fill dirt as they trucked it to the company I had bought it from. It happens sometimes, the coroner had told me when I'd asked about it a few weeks later. Kids never think about that kind of thing. They just see a big pile of dirt and start climbing. I haven't seen the two since they took the bodies away, and the company I bought it from came and got the rest of it before they gave me a full refund. I hope they find peace wherever they are now. I think, from now on, I'll just hire someone to fill the holes in my yard. I don't ever want to see another pile of dirt for as long as I live.
Sure does sound like a wet one out there. I'm glad you've got a nice, cozy, warm place to sit while we swap stories and wait for the rain to settle down a little bit. We all have some fears when we're a kid. The closet, the underside of the bed, maybe those clothes you left on the chair, and whether or not they may or may not turn into a monster while you're asleep. But it's always strange when some of those irrational childhood fears turn out to be true. So, when you get cozy later, let's hope your sleep isn't interrupted by a monster.
There it was again. Jeremy put his hands over his ears and tried to block the noise out, but the scratching against the hardwood sent chills up his spine. Stop it! Stop it right now! Jeremy clapped his hands over his mouth, terrified at what he had just done. The scratching under his bed had been happening for 3 weeks. The scratching, the weird noises, and sometimes he thought he heard whispers and whimpers amongst the odd sounds. His parents had said, "Oh, you're just dreaming," or "It's just the house settling." But Jeremy knew that it was something. There was something under there. He knew it in that way that children always know. The scratching stopped, and he lay there, silently shivering with the covers pulled up to his chin. He had done it now. Now it would slink out from under his bed and eat him up. It would come towering out from under the bed and hurt him with its long claws, or... "Who's there?" said a small voice that was trying to be brave. Jeremy jumped. That had been a child's voice. The thing under his bed had spoken, and it was a kid, like him. He peeked over the edge of the bed, expecting yellow eyes or a mouthful of pointy teeth, but no one peeked out from under his bed. After a few seconds of heavy silence, Jeremy decided to be brave for a little while longer. I'm Jeremy Bird. Why have you been under my bed all these nights making noise?" "Me? You're the terrifying thing that's been making noise under my bed this whole time," said the voice. To Jeremy, it sounded terrified. "No, I haven't," Jeremy said, and he laughed at the absurdity. "Oh, yes, you have. You growl and roar deep in the night. I've heard you," said the monster, who was blustering with angry terror. Jeremy thought for a moment. Does it sound like this? He pretended to snore. He'd gotten pretty good at it. If he wanted to trick his parents, they could stay up a little later. The monster quailed in terror. "Oh no, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Shh, that's the noise I make when I sleep, silly," Jeremy said with a laugh. "Oh," said the monster, relieved. But what about that terrible squealing you make?" it added suspiciously. Jeremy thought about it, and as he thought, he leaned back on the bed, and the springs creaked and groaned. It chills me every time I hear it," said the monster with real terror. "That's just the mattress," Jeremy said. He was becoming less afraid of this monster, as it proved to be more fearful of him. "Well, what about those little noises you make at night? They're so invasive, they make me want to scream." Jeremy thought, what could the creature be talking about? He looked at the glow of the dark stars on his ceiling as he contemplated, and smiled as he remembered how his mom had pasted them up there. What small noises late at night could this creature be talking about? He thought and thought, and his silence made the monster cry a little, a high-pitched whine at the back of his throat that made Jeremy cringe. Those are whimpers," Jeremy realized suddenly, understanding the noise as soon as he heard it. "Why do you make that sound?" the monster asked, but Jeremy already knew the answer. "Because I'm scared of you," he said, feeling a tear slip down his cheek as he lay in his bed, a child's fear coming over him that his parents would never understand, and because no one believes me. There was silence for a minute. "I'm sorry," said the monster in a small little voice. Jeremy felt himself smile a little. "It's okay. I don't think you meant to scare me. It's just in your... No, not for that. Well, I am sorry for that, but I'm more sorry for what's about to happen to you." Jeremy tensed. "What do you mean?" "Well, I had 2 monsters, the one in my closet and you. When I told the closet monster I was more afraid of you than him, he told me that he could make you go away. He told me that if I distracted you, he'd catch you off guard and make sure you never scared me again." Jeremy was silent.
I'm sorry. Please, won't you forgive me? Jeremy didn't answer. Hello? Are you still there? Please don't be mad at me. I'm sorry. But Jeremy would never answer. The only sound to be heard was the soft drip on the floor and the closet door scratching as it was pulled shut from the inside. I think there's just enough time for one more story before I take these tired old bones off for a nap. Seems like it's often hard to impress our parents. It's hard to convince them that we're not that 5-year-old with food all over their face and a messy room that we need to clean. However, sometimes it goes deeper than that. And if you're in a situation where you don't ever think your parents will accept you, then I hope you know how much love we have for you right here. But sometimes it's hard when you have a face that only a mother could love. Have you ever heard the sound a scalpel makes as it slides over bone? If you haven't, it's a little like a knife scraping over a hollow rock. The bone isn't as solid as you might think, not as solid as the blade at least, and the sound has an eerie quality to it. The more I reflect on the sound, the more it reminds me of nails on a chalkboard or sidewalk chalk that kids drag over pavement. It's a weird noise that sets your hair on edge, makes you grit your teeth against the intrusive grinding. I've had a lot of time to think about that sound in the years following my wife's death. That was the sound that woke me up that night. It had been a long week. The department had been reeling over a series of brutal murders, and this was the first night I'd gotten to sleep in my own bed. I had been crashing in the break room, sleeping in my car, living one cup of coffee at a time while we tried to catch this sadistic son of a bitch. I know many cops in the same situation, but as most of us are locals, the desire to see this guy brought to justice was palpable. The killer had been sticking to a specific area. My area, actually. He was killing with no pattern, no particular demographic, but he seemed to be sticking to victims in this particular part of town. They were low to middle income families, people who couldn't just afford to up and leave because a crazy killer was on the loose, no matter how heinous the crimes were. And the crimes were particularly heinous. 7 different victims, none of them having anything in common, had been found with their faces skinned down to the bone and removed. The whole face. It was as though someone had cut the face off, skinned it to the skull, and took it with them when they left. Nothing was ever taken from the apartments. No messages were left. The killer never lingered after doing their strange deed. We called him a killer, but the victims were usually still alive when he left. They died from blood loss afterwards, sometimes living for hours, lying there as they watched their life leak away and screamed wetly. The last one was a store owner, well liked in the community too. The one before that was an 80-year-old grandmother. Before that it was a 19-year-old girl who was popular with the boys in the neighborhood. A bike messenger, a beat cop, an aspiring actress, a high school student who was once a beauty queen. None of these people had even known each other. There was no connection between them except for where they lived, and no one could find a single person that any of them knew in common. The only connection seemed to be that they were all well liked. I had been sent home that night, Captain telling me that I looked like crap and I needed to sleep in a real bed. My wife had been waiting for me. Captain Weems may have called her before I left, and the night had been a good one. She had saved me some dinner, roast, potatoes, things I liked, and we had cuddled on the couch as we watched something on Netflix. As tired as I was, I remember feeling warm just the same as I spent the night with her. When she looked up at me, her head pillowed in my lap, I remember thinking I was the luckiest guy in the world. When I fell asleep after a rather heated session of lovemaking, I found myself looking forward to the next day, hoping that we could catch this guy and get rid of some of the fear that was hanging around like a cloud. When I came awake, it was because of the scraping noise. Some nights, I wish I had just stayed asleep. I lay awake for a few seconds, listening to the scraping sound and wondering what it could be. It was such an alien noise, like a nail dragged across a window. There was an underlying sound as well, a low, muffled sound, like someone having a bad dream. I rolled on my side, thinking my wife was having a nightmare or something,
and wanting to comfort her. She was prone to nightmares. Her childhood had been less than ideal, and I wanted to wrap her in my reassuring arms. I found myself unable to move, though. My whole body was heavy, my muscles unresponsive, and all I could do was lie there and listen to her soft groans and husky moans. I was trying to move, but this was different than the usual sleep paralysis somehow. This felt like being out of my body, unable to control it. Then my eyes tracked to the mirror that sat atop my wife's vanity, and I felt a scream hang in my throat like a piece of meat. I was choking on the scream as my mind tried to process what I was seeing. It was a dream. It had to be. Things like this didn't exist in the real world. This was a nightmare. Maybe I was even the one making these noises that I was hearing. This simply couldn't be happening. I was dreaming. I was nightmaring. I would wake up. This would all go away. The longer it went on, though, the more I concluded that it had to be happening. The thing reflected in the mirror was nearly 7 feet tall. It crouched in the bedroom, leaning over my wife, as it slid one long finger over her face. Its head was large, like a big gray baby doll head, with the face covered by a grotesque mask that looked plastered on. There was a spread of red around the mask's corners, and it looked stretched and frayed as it lay pancaked across the creature's face. The creature's body was gray, long and disproportionately slim, on a pair of spindly legs that disappeared below the corner of the bed. What interested me most, however, were the long gray arms that ended in pointy fingers. Fingers he was currently sliding over my wife's face. He was tracing that long finger along the same track, again and again, and I could just see a trickle of blood sliding down one of her cheeks as I watched helplessly. I could see a trench working its way through the skin, the blood beginning to run more freely as he went. His eyes, his overly expressive blue eyes, followed the finger's path as he worked, and I tried with all I had to break out of whatever held me. The too big head looked up from its work, and I realized I was shaking a bit as I watched him. His hand stretched out, impossibly long, and one of those claws came to rest in my ear. It was cold and wet, like a fish that's been plucked from a stream. Suddenly, my shuddering stopped, and I realized why I couldn't move. This thing had done something to me, had done something to my wife. I was forced to lay there and watch as he went about his work. The process was not quick. Whatever tool he had at the end of his wrist was dull indeed. He had to make the circuit for nearly an hour and a half, and my wife's muffled cries were beginning to become more pitiful. The blood was really coming down now, pooling on the bed and turning the white sheet a deep red. I saw my wife starting to shudder, thinking she might come out of it. He touched her with one of those claws, though, putting the tip in her ear, and she went still again. I was going to have to watch as he took her face off. At some point, I think I realized that. All the realizing in the world, though, wouldn't prepare me for it. Finally, after what felt like days, he pulled the finger back and bent over her. He brought both hands up, 10 scalpel fingers peeling the face I had loved so much from her too white skull. That's the other sound I'll never forget. The sound of my wife's face being peeled away sounds like nothing so much as Velcro separating. I saw it in the murky glass as it came free. For just an instant, I could see the creature's face, too. It pulled off the old mask, and I realized too late that it was the face of the shopkeeper we had found a few days ago. It put the face in its mouth, and as it chewed, I could see a face like a swollen potato, its mouth like a carved jack-o'-lantern sneer. Its rubbery teeth chewed at the flesh as those eyes stared blankly into space. It had a pair of way too expressive blue eyes, and for a moment I thought they might have come from a doll. They looked at me suddenly, locked mine as I stared into the mirror. Those horrible blue eyes held my gaze for a count of 20 before it slapped the new face on with a wet chuck sound. Those eyes stared back at me through the eye holes of my wife's detached face, and the creature went out through the window without a second look. Those eyes peeking jealously out of my wife's face were the worst part, and that face haunts my dreams every night. By the time I could move, she was already dead. She came out of it before I did, though. She lay on the bed, gasping wetly and calling for me. I didn't know if she could see me. Did her eyes still work? She passed out a few times as she tried to turn her head, finally just laying in her own blood and calling for me softly. She wanted me to save her, wanted me to wake her up from this nightmare. She couldn't be dying in her own bed after having her face cut off. I began to get some feeling back in my arms as her voice trailed away. I could flex my fingers, but my arms didn't seem to want to work until after she had already slipped off. The light had begun to peek in by that time, and I fell out of bed as I scrambled for the phone. I told them everything. I told them about the creature. I told them about its long claws. I told them about the paralyzing dread. I told them how it had taken my wife's face and left out the window. Their response was to send me to a therapist, to give me time to grieve, to have me work with a hypnotherapist, to try to decide if I had actually seen something. I quickly learned that they didn't want to believe what I had seen. They wanted to believe that I had created this monster from my trauma. They wanted me to believe it too, but I wouldn't. I suffered through the bereavement period. I went to the therapists and told them what they wanted to hear. They wanted to tell me that the creature was a way for my mind to cope with what had happened. I knew better, though. I used that downtime to gain information about the creature. There wasn't much to go on. The crimes had all been committed within 2 blocks of each other, all in a central location, all in the part of town that housed several large apartment complexes. I asked around, seeing if anyone had seen anything like it, but I got very few answers. Some of the homeless people told me that they had seen something skulking about lately, but most of them were too strung out to be credible. A few of them led me to an abandoned underground station that had once been central to the area, but now stood abandoned. The homeless didn't stay there anymore, and if they did, they stayed there forever, or so they told me. After a month of bereavement, I came back with the information I had compiled. I was ready to hand it to the chief, but I returned to a very different environment. No one believed that I'd seen a monster steal my wife's face. I began to hear rumbles around the station that I was a suspect now. A 15-year officer had just laid there and watched his wife have her face taken off. Not likely. Seemed more likely that I had been out all night and come home to find her like that. It seemed more likely still that I was the killer, banking on the idea that my reputation would put me above suspicion. I didn't care. I knew what I'd seen, and I took my information straight to my boss. My boss, however, was in another camp altogether. Is this how you spend your period of mourning? I want you fresh, all this monster stuff out of your system. The others, they already think you're unhinged. The ones who don't think it think you're the killer. You need to be careful talking about this kind of crap around here. Get back to your desk. You're on light duty until further notice. I don't want another word about this damn monster. I seized behind my desk, already planning my next move. If it was proof they wanted, then it was proof I'd give them. I left early that morning and went to my home to prepare. I packed a bag, took my service pistol, and a shotgun from the hall closet. The little pump action fit nicely in my camp sack, as well as a rope, a flashlight, and some trail bars. I dressed warmly. The November weather was already becoming frigid after dark, and I looked back at my apartment before leaving, unsure if I'd ever see it again. I glanced at my wife's portrait on the mantel, though, and it was enough to send me on my way. This creature wouldn't be wearing her face for long. The old underground was a dilapidated relic, a toothless mouth that gaped out of the pavement. The gate was locked, but I had been told the fence was cut around the back. Some industrious vag had made a neat little hole to scurry through, and I entered the perimeter without much fuss. The sun had begun to set as I flipped on the flashlight, and it cast a red glow across the grimy tiles. The glow was gone after the second staircase, and I was plunged into true darkness. The outside had looked bad, but the inside was a ruin. The tiles had been shattered in places, light fixtures hanging from a leaky roof, and a single train stood like a hulk on a dead track. There was a constant sound of dripping water, a constant sound of scurrying feet, and it was easy to imagine that this was what Bilbo Baggins had found under the Goblin Mountain. I found myself swinging my flashlight around at every sound, my years of cool police training melting away as I descended into the station. Near the tracks, I found a handprint that looked red with dried blood. I jumped down to the tracks without a second thought, drawing my gun and looking right and left. My light fell across a fainted smear going left, light red staining the side of the train. I decided that was my direction. I moved quietly, not wanting to tip my prey off. He could have been hanging over my head for all I knew. If he lived here, he could probably see in the dark, and bringing a beacon with me would be as good as screaming down the tunnel. As I moved, I had little doubt that he knew I was here. The deeper in I went, the worse the scuttling and the skittering became. I told myself it was rats, but how sure was I of that? How sure was I that the scrabbling I heard wasn't the sound of those sharp fingers scraping across the ceiling? How sure was I that that scrabbling was the sound of those equally long toes that I had never seen, gripping the pavement and moving his body along in a quiet scuttle? As I took another corner, I could swear that something big moved just out of my flashlight beam. I held it there for a count of 20 before turning away and continuing down the tunnel. The blood smears were all gone now, but I felt drawn deeper in as I took turns at random. It was almost as if I could hear my wife's voice calling me, and I had little doubt that he knew I was there now. I had even less doubt when he fell on my back, slamming my head down on the floor and sending my gun spinning out of my hand. I blacked out, and when I came to, I really wished I had died. I was laid across a metal bench somewhere deep in the tunnel. An eerie light lit the space, some kind of plant life maybe, and I found that I was paralyzed again. That was when my wife's face, a face made terrible by those two expressive eyes, loomed over me, and I'd have cringed away if I'd been able to move at all. It studied me, maybe it even recognized me, but its regard was terrible, as it came from a face I had loved so much. Her face was decomposed, rotting away as it clung to the creature's skull, and I felt something goopy fall onto my cheek as he leaned close to inspect me. I had only thought it couldn't get any worse. That was when he pressed that finger to the cleft in my chin. He began to circle, the claw digging against my skin as he slid the nail around and around and around my face. It didn't hurt at first. At first, it was little more than a discomfort, and I began to wonder how long he had been carving at my wife before I woke up. I stared at him, and he stared back, those baby blue eyes boring into me. His eyes were mesmerizing, terrifying, as they held unwaveringly still. As the minutes stretched into hours, I began to feel my face heating up. It was subtle at first, just a little warmth around my chin and forehead, but as the circling finger went round and round and round, I felt like someone was holding a lighter on my skin. I would have screamed, my flesh becoming seared, but I couldn't move, and my horror was trapped in my throat. I started to feel the blood as it slid down my cheek. First, it was just a trickle, a damp line or two, but soon it ran in rivulets. Soon I could feel my flesh parting from my skull. Soon I could feel that sizzling heat as it cut my skin, and I felt as though I might pass out. I had to. I must black out from this shock. There was no way that everyone was awake as he cut their living face from their body. It was impossible. It was sick. It was... He pulled the finger back suddenly, and I realized with real horror what was about to happen. All 10 fingers gripped my flesh, and I tried to pull away. Maybe I could still make it to a hospital. They could fix me. They could make this right. There was no way he was going to take my face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. It wasn't supposed to... He gripped my face, and I heard that same Velcro ripping as my own skin came free of my skull. Then he devoured my wife's face as I watched, and slapped my own across the gore-soaked canvas that was his lumpy head. He hooted then. Hooted and cried in a strange, unknowable language. He turned to a deeper tunnel and cried out in pure pleasure as he fulfilled whatever ritual he was performing, whatever dark spell he needed these faces for. I hoped he would let me go now. I had lost a lot of blood, but maybe I could still get some medical attention. I felt groggy, but when I heard something struggling out of the depths of the tunnel, I felt something heavy settle into my guts. What fresh hell was this? Out of the darkness, lit only by whatever phosphorescence dwelled down here, came a hulking thing that slid on long gray limbs. It was spider-like, a massive gray blob that pulled itself along on something like tentacles. Each of them ended in the same hooked fingers as the creature. It lowered its equally mushy face to the creature, taking in the face he now wore, and I heard something speak in a voice made of broken glass. "Do's it please, oo mother? Do I please, oo mother?" it cried, and that voice was full of hope and terrible longing. The gray creature leaned in, seemed to contemplate for a long moment, before it opened its shapeless mouth and whispered a single horrible word in a language like snakes crawling across my naked face. "Ugly." Then it pulled itself back into the depths, and I heard the creature sobbing as it fell to its gray knees and wept. Then, suddenly I was running. My mind had set itself to autopilot, and my body and mind just couldn't take it anymore. Myself pushed against this thing and its terrible need, and my body propelled itself away before this knowledge could do my brain lasting harm. I ran and ran, blind in that lightless world, as the blood leaked down my naked face. If the creature came after me, then I never knew. If the thing that wore my face came after me, I never knew. I was running one second, the darkness pressing in all around me, and the next my world was full of light, and I was falling into oblivion. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, being told just how lucky I was to be alive. An undercover cop had followed me to the underground entrance, and had waited to question me when I came back out. When I didn't come out for several hours, he called in people to look for me. Those people had heard me screaming through the tunnels, caught sight of my faceless form in their flashlights, and caught me just before I fell. I had nearly died on the way here. I had simply lost too much blood, and my body was in some kind of shock. They had sedated me, my night terrors causing me to buck and scream, and I had spent nearly a week in the hospital bed. No one thinks I'm crazy anymore. No one thinks I'm the killer anymore. Certainly, no one believes I cut my own damn face off. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone living in the area. Get out. Leave your home, and get out. The creature has no rhyme or reason for his actions. He seeks only to gain something that I believe he will never find. I'm safe now, a faceless horror who will have to live his life with the knowledge I discovered under the city that day. But you needn't suffer my fate. Get away from the cheap side. Get away from the concrete apartments. Get as far from the city as you can, lest you be one more face for this monster to show his mother.
I believe that'll just about do it for us today. Thanks so much for coming by to listen to some great stories and spend a rainy day with me, Dr. Plague. I do hope I'll see you again tomorrow for more cozy horror and more good times. Till then, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.